You sacrificed everything for a complete stranger, Emma? This property doesn't survive on good intentions alone. Her family's harsh words haunted her thoughts, yet Emma Rodriguez refused to waver. She had handed over her final $2,000 to a military veteran she'd barely met because his child needed medical care, and foreclosure loomed over his family. She believed she was destroying her ranch's future just to prevent someone else from losing their home. Dawn brought an empty feed room. The horses whinnied hungrily, and she prepared for farewell. Then three olive-green military vehicles rumbled up her dusty driveway, and the veteran she'd assisted emerged wearing full-dress uniform. He wasn't merely a former soldier. He represented something much larger. Welcome to Heartfelt Chronicles, where stories of generosity and compassion come alive. Let's discover the truth behind these events. Maria Santos had operated the Dusty Rose Cafe in remote West Texas for more than 2 decades. She'd witnessed brutal seasons and even harsher individuals, yet she'd also experienced small miracles, though they never arrived easily. Most mornings found her stationed behind the register by 6 a.m., sleeves pushed up, apron dusted with baking flour, awaiting the initial wave of cattlemen and farmers to shuffle in, barely conscious and desperate for caffeine. That particular morning, sunrise hadn't yet evaporated the moisture from the grass. The atmosphere carried scents of parched soil and sun-baked dreams. Maria's weathered hands moved in familiar patterns, filling coffee cups, delivering plates, cleaning surfaces, while her thoughts wandered to Emma Rodriguez, the woman sitting quietly at the cafe's far corner. She remained consistently courteous, perpetually thankful, and recently always exhausted. The rancher's daughter visited every few days for an inexpensive cup of coffee and whatever Maria could offer. Yesterday's pastries, an additional roll, nothing elaborate, simply enough to sustain her. Maria had stopped requesting payment long ago. She could sense Emma's dignity made even accepting leftovers feel like a silent struggle. That morning, Emma sat curved over the counter, fingers clutched tightly around a cracked ceramic cup. She appeared sleepless. Maria recognized that type of weariness, the kind that didn't stem from insufficient rest, but from attempting to keep everything together with deteriorating strength. "Just coffee this morning?" Maria inquired gently, already anticipating the response. Emma managed a weary smile. "Just coffee." Maria nodded and refilled her cup. From Maria's position, she could observe Emma's hands shaking slightly, likely from hunger or anxiety or both. What Maria hadn't yet discovered was that Emma had just counted her remaining $2,000 across her kitchen table that morning. That represented everything, her final resources. The extended drought had transformed her grazing land into powder, and her horses, the sole remaining fragment of her father's heritage, were running low on feed. Emma could have spent that money purchasing one final hay shipment, perhaps extending survival another month. But the previous evening, she'd walked the property counting fence sections and calculating damages, and instinctively she already understood the land was slipping away from her. Maria remained unaware of those details, but she would learn soon enough. The entrance bell chimed, a sound Maria typically welcomed, but this time it carried a different tension. A quiet unease accompanied the man who entered. He wore faded denim, a worn military cap, and a jacket that had seen better years. His features were angular, eyes hollow, a beard that hadn't seen trimming in days. He spoke little as he limped toward the counter. Not from laziness, Maria could determine, but from an old injury that never properly mended. "Coffee, black," the man muttered, settling onto a stool 3 spaces from Emma. Maria poured without speaking. She understood how to interpret people. This man carried pride, wounded but proud. Emma glanced up from her cup and observed him. Maria noticed Emma remain quiet but attentive. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in criticism, but in understanding. That stare, the 1,000-mile kind. Her brother had returned from Iraq with that identical haunted expression. She recognized its meaning. "How's the employment search progressing, Marcus?" Maria asked, attempting to maintain lightness. He offered a half-hearted shrug. Warehouse declined. "My legs. Liability issues." Maria despised how employers spoke that way. Liability. as though the man hadn't already sacrificed plenty. Emma's fingers gripped her mug tighter. Marcus took a measured sip of coffee. "We received the eviction papers yesterday." Maria froze mid-motion. "Eviction?" He nodded. 3 days, $22,000 or we're homeless. Maria lacked a response for that, and she realized neither did Emma. "My spouse is working overtime at the medical center. The baby's ill, though," Marcus added, barely audible. "We've exhausted all options." Silence descended again, heavy, dense, the type of silence that makes breathing feel difficult. Maria thought she saw Emma shift slightly in her position, like something inside her was coming undone. Then came the question. "You served?" Emma asked. Marcus turned, surprised. He nodded once. "2 deployments in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan." Emma nodded. "My brother was with the 82nd Airborne, said they were the finest unit over there." Marcus smiled faintly. "Solid group." Maria remained quiet. She didn't want to interfere. Something was developing, something she couldn't quite identify yet. Then Emma reached into her jacket pocket. Her movements were deliberate, purposeful. Maria watched in amazement as she withdrew an envelope, thick and worn at the edges, and placed it carefully on the counter between them. "I have $2,000, she said. Marcus blinked. "What?" "It was intended for feed," Emma continued. "For my horses, but your family requires it more." Maria's heart nearly ceased. Marcus stared at the envelope, then back at Emma. "I cannot accept that. We're complete strangers." "You served our nation," she said simply. "My father always said we owe veterans more than we could ever repay." Marcus shook his head. "But that's your money. You need it." Emma's lips quivered. "I'll manage somehow. Perhaps sell another horse." Maria couldn't remain silent anymore. "Emma, are you certain about this?" Emma didn't hesitate. "What value is money if I simply watch someone else lose everything?" Marcus swallowed hard. His hand hovered over the envelope before finally accepting it. "I don't know how to respond." "You don't need to," Emma said. "Just promise me you'll recover." "I swear it," Marcus whispered. Maria turned away to refill the coffee pot, primarily so no one would notice the tears forming in her eyes. After Marcus departed, Emma remained for another 30 minutes, sipping slowly, silent. "That was your feed money, wasn't it?" Maria asked. Emma nodded. "What will you do?" "I'm not sure yet," Emma said. "Make calls. Maybe someone has hay available or work." Maria sighed. She wanted to solve it, but knew better than to offer empty hope. That evening, Maria stood in the cafe's rear doorway, watching Emma's truck vanish down the road. The sun had dropped low, creating long shadows across the arid hills. Maria had witnessed much during her years behind that counter. But something about Emma Rodriguez's quiet sacrifice affected her profoundly. She didn't know what would follow, but something told her this wasn't the story's conclusion. It was the opening. The following morning arrived with an unsettling calm. Maria unlocked the Dusty Rose Cafe just before 6 o'clock. Same as always. But the atmosphere felt altered. The usual energy of the early crowd was absent. No conversation about feed costs or broken equipment. Just a quiet that seeped under the door and settled over the counter like mist. She was cleaning the coffee machine when the memory of Emma's expression flashed through her mind. The way she had departed the night before. Shoulders drooped but eyes determined. That woman had surrendered everything she possessed to assist a stranger. And Maria knew that kind of giving left a permanent mark on a person, deep and unchangeable. By 7, only 2 regulars had appeared. Maria poured their coffee and tried to stay occupied, but her eyes kept darting to the entrance, hoping perhaps Emma would enter again, hoping she hadn't lost everything overnight. Just after 8, the telephone rang. It was Pete Hansen from the feed supply. "Maria, you wouldn't happen to know if Emma Rodriguez is in town, would you?" Maria's heart jumped. "Not certain. Why?" "Well, I have her listed for a hay delivery last week, but I heard she canceled. I was going to offer her a discount if she could pay today." Old man Thompson left me some extra. Thought maybe you'd relay the message if you see her. Maria thanked him and hung up, but the tension in her chest only intensified. She stepped outside to get some fresh air and looked down the road that led toward Rodriguez Ranch. Dust hung in the distance. Not much, but just enough to catch the light. She didn't know it yet, but something significant had occurred out there. Something substantial. Back on the ranch, Emma Rodriguez had awakened to the sound of horses calling out. Not panicked, just hungry. It was a familiar sound now, one that twisted in her chest. She pulled on her boots, stepped out into the morning light, and braced herself for what she knew had to be done. Today, she would begin making calls to sell the remaining horses. She hated the thought. Her father's horses were more than just animals. They were his legacy. His blood, sweat, and early mornings were woven into their care. But with the last of the feed nearly gone, she had no alternative. Her porch groaned underfoot as she stepped down into the yard. The barn stood quiet under the rising sun. The red paint had faded. The fences sagged wearily, and the dry pasture stretched endlessly, cracked and brittle. She whispered apologies as she scattered the last handfuls of grain. Just enough to quiet their stomachs, not enough to nourish them. "I'll find a solution," she murmured, stroking her father's favorite mare on the nose. "I promise." But even Emma didn't believe those words anymore. Then the sound of gravel crunching under tires. She turned toward the drive, expecting maybe a neighbor or Pete from the feed supply. But what she saw made her freeze mid-step. 3 large military trucks were rolling down the narrow path toward her ranch, dust clouds rising behind them like something from a combat film. Emma wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped forward cautiously. The lead truck came to a stop, and a man in full uniform stepped out. Tall, composed, metals glinting softly in the sunlight. "Are you Emma Rodriguez?" he asked. Emma nodded. "Yes, what's happening?" "I'm Colonel David Mitchell," he said, extending a hand. "We're searching for some local land to use for training exercises. Your property was recommended to us." She blinked. "My property?" "Yes, ma'am. We need open terrain for signal and communication testing. Quiet, isolated locations with good coverage. Yours fits perfectly." Emma looked around her broken fence lines and dust-filled pasture, trying to understand. "Who recommended me?" The colonel consulted a small notepad. "Mr. Marcus Wilson said your land was perfect for this type of exercise," her breath caught. "Marcus from the cafe?" "Yes, he's one of our veterans, works with our reintegration program." Now Emma could barely process it. The man she gave her last $2,000 to, the one who claimed he had no job, no stability, had directed the military to her doorstep. "I don't understand," she said softly. The colonel smiled gently. "We're prepared to offer $5,000 for 3 days' use of your land. We'll keep to ourselves, handle everything, and won't interfere with your animals or structures." Emma swayed slightly, her knees locking to prevent stumbling. $5,000. Enough to buy feed. Enough to keep the ranch operating another month, maybe more. She swallowed. That would help tremendously. "Excellent," the colonel said. "Would you mind showing me the property? We'd like to set up along the western ridge." Emma led the way, still numb. As they walked, more trucks arrived. Men in uniform began unloading crates and equipment. One soldier passed her with a respectful nod, carrying what appeared to be long communication poles and field radios. Then a voice called out, "Colonel, we've unloaded the special delivery." The colonel nodded. "Excellent. Miss Rodriguez, would you mind showing us your barn? If the weather changes, we might need indoor storage." She led him to the barn, heart pounding. But when she pulled the doors open, she stopped cold. Inside, stacked neatly along the side wall, were hay bales. Dozens of them, fresh, golden, fragrant enough to feed her horses for weeks. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "What is this?" The colonel simply said, "Just part of the arrangement. We believe in leaving places better than we found them." Emma turned to him, stunned. "But how did you know I needed feed?" The colonel smiled. "There's someone better suited to explain that." Right on cue, a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway. Emma walked outside as the back door opened, and Marcus Wilson stepped out. But he looked nothing like the weary, slumped man from the cafe. He stood tall, limp, nearly gone, wearing a crisp uniform. A badge she didn't recognize gleamed on his chest. "Hello, Emma," he said with a soft smile. She folded her arms. "You look different." He nodded. "May we talk inside?" Inside the kitchen, she made coffee again, more from habit than courtesy. She didn't speak until the mugs were full. "You weren't just a veteran in trouble, were you?" she asked. Marcus shook his head. "I am a veteran, but not without resources. And yes, my family was facing eviction, but not because we had no help, because the system moved slowly. Too slowly." Emma stared at him, silent. Marcus slid a folder across the table. "I work with the Henderson Foundation. We assist struggling veterans. But we also watch for people like you. People who help even when it costs them everything." "You were testing me," Emma whispered. "No," Marcus replied gently. "We were observing, and you passed something no one can fake. Character." Maria didn't usually close the cafe in the middle of the day, but that afternoon, after the morning rush faded and the heat settled in like a heavy blanket, she hung the "back in 30" sign on the door and locked up. Something in her chest just wouldn't settle. She needed to see Emma. The gravel crunched under her truck tires as she drove west, the road winding past brittle pastures and broken fences until Rodriguez Ranch appeared in the distance. Red barn barely holding its color, but something else too. Something new. Military trucks, equipment, activity, and horses. She realized horses munching on fresh golden hay. When Maria parked at the gate and stepped out, she didn't have time to knock. Emma met her halfway, boots dusty, hands still stained with grain. "Maria," she asked, surprised, "what are you doing all the way out here?" "I was about to ask you the same thing," Maria replied, glancing toward the trucks. "Is that the army?" "Not exactly," Emma said, brushing her hair from her face. "Come inside. I'll explain." The house smelled like fresh coffee and sunlight, the kind of quiet warmth only someone who's lived through hard winters could appreciate. Maria sat down at the kitchen table, and Emma, without saying anything, slid a piece of paper toward her. Maria picked it up and skimmed. Her eyes widened. $5,000, she whispered, "for just 3 days." Emma nodded slowly. "And that's not all." She told Maria everything. About Marcus, about the cafe, about the envelope, about the soldiers who showed up this morning, and the hay stacked in her barn like a silent answer to a whispered prayer. "The Henderson Foundation?" Maria asked. Emma stood and walked to the counter, retrieving a folder Marcus had left. Inside were documents, details, and letters. "They help veterans," Emma said, "but they also look for people who help others quietly without asking for anything back." Maria turned the folder over in her hands. "So this wasn't random?" "No," Emma said. "It was intentional. All of it." Maria sat back, stunned. Her mind drifted back to that moment in the cafe, the look in Emma's eyes as she slid the envelope across the counter. She had no idea anyone was watching, that her choice would ripple this far. "You know," Maria said slowly, "I've spent my life feeding people, listening to stories, but I've never seen something like this." Emma smiled, soft and tired. "Neither have I." But just as the weight of it all began to settle, another truck rolled up outside. Not military this time. A long black SUV, polished to a shine. The two women stood and stepped onto the porch. As the door opened, a man in a dark suit stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered. His tie was loose, but his presence was unmistakable. Calm, commanding. "Miss Rodriguez," he said. Emma nodded cautiously. "I'm Robert Henderson." Maria blinked. The name from the folder. "The founder." "I believe you've spoken with Marcus," he continued, "and Colonel Mitchell." "Yes," Emma said. "Is something wrong?" Henderson shook his head. "No, quite the opposite. I just prefer to meet the people we invest in personally." He stepped up onto the porch, looking out over the ranch. The tired barn, the patched fences, the fields slowly reclaiming life. My father was a horseman, he said, before we lost everything, and I used to sleep in barns like that when I was a boy. Emma didn't know what to say. She simply nodded. I was homeless once, Henderson continued, voice steady. Someone helped me when I had nothing. Years later, I built the foundation to repay that debt, a debt of kindness. But here's what I've learned over the years. People who give when they're hurting, they're the ones who understand the weight of a gift. He turned to her. And you, Emma Rodriguez, gave more than money. You gave dignity. You saw a struggling veteran and acted without hesitation. That's rare. Emma's voice trembled. I just didn't want to let someone fall through the cracks. Henderson smiled. Exactly. Then he handed her another envelope. What's this? Emma asked. A contract, Henderson replied. We're proposing something bigger than a 3-day rental. The foundation is launching a pilot program for therapeutic equine therapy for veterans recovering from PTSD, physical trauma, emotional wounds. And your ranch is exactly what we've been looking for. Emma looked down at the envelope in her hands. It felt heavy, not just in weight, but in meaning. You want to lease my land? She asked. Henderson nodded. 10 acres. We'll build the facilities, provide licensed therapists, bring in veterans from across the state. All you'd need to do is care for the horses and help guide the sessions, if you're willing. Maria watched as Emma opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the figures. Monthly compensation for land, wages for her time and expertise, enough to cover everything she'd lost, and then some. She looked up, stunned. This is a beginning, Henderson said. Silence hung between them. Not uncomfortable, but sacred, like something too big for words had just happened. Maria found herself blinking back tears again. She had watched Emma give quietly, freely, and now she was watching her be restored. Not with charity, but with purpose. After Henderson left, Emma sat on the porch steps, hands still gripping the contract. Maria joined her. You're not just getting help, Maria said. You're building something new. Emma nodded slowly. I think this is what the ranch was always meant for. Maria smiled. And your dad? He'd be real proud right now. The sun dipped low, casting golden light over the fields. In the distance, soldiers moved quietly, setting up camp. Horses nickered, fed and content. And for the first time in years, Emma's land felt alive again. Hope had returned, not loudly, not with fanfare, but with quiet boots on gravel and a promise kept. It had been 3 days since the soldiers arrived. 3 days since Emma Rodriguez's quiet ranch turned into something resembling a small, orderly base of operations. But even amid the tents, trucks, and drills, the land hadn't lost its peace. If anything, the military presence seemed to breathe new life into the place. Maria came by again on the third morning, bringing a box of still-warm cinnamon rolls. She found Emma standing near the barn, watching one of the soldiers gently stroke the muzzle of her father's old mare. You're feeding them sugar, aren't you? Emma asked with a smirk. The young man laughed. Ma'am, I plead the fifth. Maria stepped beside her, holding out the box. A peace offering. Emma took one, chuckling. I could eat 6, but I'll start with 1. The 2 women sat under the shade of the oak tree near the paddock, watching the soldiers work. Some were repairing the back fence. Others were clearing brush along the creek line. A few were adjusting communication poles, the so-called training exercise that had brought them here in the first place. You realize they've fixed more of your ranch in 3 days than a year's worth of hired hands, Maria said. Emma shook her head in disbelief. I know, and they refuse to let me pay for any of it. It's not charity, Maria reminded her. It's gratitude. Emma looked down at her hands, still rough from work, still marked by years of strain. It doesn't feel real. A week ago, I was rationing hay and wondering how many horses I'd have to sell just to keep the lights on. Now I'm being offered a lease, a salary, a purpose. Maria placed a hand over hers. You were seen, Emma. That's all any of us want in the end. To be seen, especially when we do the right thing. A voice called out from the barn. It was Marcus. He was walking toward them with a different kind of stride now. Not quite a limp, but not fully healed either. He carried himself with quiet confidence, and Maria noticed how the younger soldiers deferred to him even when the colonel wasn't around. "Morning," he greeted. "Morning," Emma and Maria said in unison. Marcus knelt down in the grass, setting a small envelope between them. "What's this?" Emma asked. "My promise," he said. "I told you I'd pay you back." Emma frowned. "Marcus, I know what you told me," he interrupted gently, "and I meant what I said. But the foundation insists we honor commitments. It's part of the program." She hesitated, then slowly took the envelope. But before she could speak, Marcus added, "Or if you'd prefer, donate it. There's a veterans shelter in Houston that just opened. They could use the funds." Emma smiled. "That feels right." Maria watched them. It was a small exchange, but it carried weight. Quiet dignity on both sides. The kind of moment people overlook unless they know what to look for. That afternoon, Colonel Mitchell asked Emma for a short walk across the south pasture, the area proposed for the therapy facility. Maria tagged along, curious. The colonel explained the plans in more detail. Modular buildings with climate control, indoor riding arena, quiet sleeping quarters for veterans staying overnight, licensed therapists, caseworkers, and horse trainers, all funded through Henderson's Foundation. "We've tested this in Colorado," he said, "but Texas is different. The land's older here. The quiet goes deeper. Veterans feel that." Emma nodded. "So do the horses." Maria could see it in Emma's face. She wasn't just agreeing out of politeness. She believed it, felt it in her bones. "What would you need from me?" Emma asked. "Your care for the animals, your presence with the veterans, and your honesty when things don't work. We're not looking for perfect. We're looking for real." Emma looked out across the land. "You'll build all this?" she asked. The colonel nodded. "And maintain it for at least 5 years, with your consent." Emma didn't answer immediately. She walked a few steps ahead, bent down, and picked up a smooth stone from the ground, turned it over in her hand. Maria watched her closely, knowing the weight of the decision wasn't about the logistics. It was about her father, about what he built, about whether this new chapter honored the old one. Finally, Emma turned back. "My dad used to say this land had a purpose," she said, "but for a long time, I thought that purpose died with him. Now I see it didn't die. It just hadn't found the right moment." Colonel Mitchell smiled. "We'd be honored to help you fulfill it." They returned to the house in silence, and when Emma signed the lease later that evening, it didn't feel like a business deal. It felt like the beginning of something sacred. That night, Maria sat with her again on the porch, listening to the sound of laughter from the distant tents, the shuffle of hooves in the barn, and the wind slipping through the trees like a quiet song. "You know," Maria said softly, "some people wait their whole lives for a sign. You didn't wait. You acted." Emma didn't say anything. She just reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the original envelope, the one she had given Marcus at the cafe. Now empty, now symbolic. "I was terrified," she whispered. "I thought giving it away would mean the end." Maria looked at her with tearful eyes. Turns out it was the beginning. The official ceremony wasn't grand. No cameras, no press, just folding chairs under a Texas sky, a few banners hanging between the fence posts, and a podium borrowed from the local high school. But to Maria Santos, it might as well have been a national holiday. The flags fluttered above the pasture where the new equine therapy center would be built, a place where veterans could find peace, not through medication or noise, but through the quiet trust of an animal, through breath, through earth, through stillness. Maria stood at the back of the small crowd, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Emma Rodriguez. Emma wasn't wearing anything fancy, jeans, a clean button-up, her father's old belt buckle. But she stood taller than Maria had ever seen her, not just in posture, but in spirit. She had become something more than a rancher now. She was a steward. The ceremony began with a few brief words from Colonel Mitchell. He spoke plainly, like a soldier used to giving orders, but humbled by moments like these. This program isn't about fixing people, he said. It's about creating space for healing, and that space doesn't exist without people like Emma Rodriguez. Applause followed, short, respectful, warm. Marcus stepped up next. He wasn't in uniform, just a gray collared shirt and jeans. But Maria noticed several veterans in the audience stand a little straighter when he approached the mic. I told Emma once that I'd pay her back, he began, smiling softly. But the truth is, I never could. Not really, because what she gave me, gave all of us, was more than money. He paused, voice cracking slightly. She gave dignity when no one else was watching. Emma didn't cry, not visibly, but Maria saw the way her fingers tightened around the paper she held. A short speech she hadn't yet decided if she'd read. Then after a brief nod from Henderson, standing quietly near the back in a black suit and no fanfare, Emma stepped up to the microphone. She didn't read the speech. She looked out at the crowd, then at the land behind them. This place was built by my father, she began, and for years after he passed, I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it. I kept feeding the horses, fixing what I could, but it always felt like I was waiting for something. Her voice didn't shake. It was calm, like rain hitting dry soil. Then I met someone at a cafe, a stranger, and I had $2,000 in my pocket that I was saving for feed. I don't know why, but I gave it away. A soft murmur passed through the audience. I thought I was losing everything that day. Turns out I was planting something. She looked over her shoulder at the red barn, the new posts lining the south pasture. And now this ranch has a new purpose, one my father would have believed in. She stepped down without flourish. No applause broke out, not right away, because no one wanted to interrupt the quiet beauty of what she had just said. But eventually the crowd stood, and the applause came. Not like thunder, but like a rising tide. After the ceremony, Maria stayed behind to help pack up chairs. Most guests had already left, but she lingered in the barn a while longer, watching Emma walk the pasture with Marcus and the colonel, pointing at sections of fence and discussing timelines. Funny, isn't it? Said a voice behind her. She turned. It was Henderson. Funny how? She asked. He gestured toward Emma. How sometimes the people with the least to give the most. Maria smiled. It's not funny to me. It's familiar. Henderson tilted his head, curious. I've watched people come into my cafe for 2 decades, and I'll tell you, I know when someone's hurting but chooses to be kind anyway. That's the rarest kind of courage. He nodded. Then I hope you know this never would have happened without you. Maria blinked. Me? You kept the doors open. You kept her fed. You saw her when others didn't. That matters more than you know. He handed her a card. If you ever want to be part of the foundation in any way, advisory, volunteer, we'd be lucky to have you. Maria tucked the card into her apron without looking at it. Let's just make sure those horses stay fed first. They both laughed. That evening, Emma and Maria sat on the porch again, just like they had so many times before. But this time, the air felt different, lighter. The contract was signed. The funds were processed. Construction would begin within a week. The horses had full bellies. The ranch had a future, and Emma had peace. You ever think, Emma said quietly, that maybe giving away your last dollar is exactly when life gives you something back? Maria nodded. Yeah, but only if you do it for the right reasons. They watched the sun dip below the horizon. No grand music, no big finale, just 2 women watching a piece of the world finally settle into place. And in the distance by the barn, one of the mares let out a soft whinny, as if she too understood hope had returned. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily, quietly, and in the hands of those who had the heart to give, even when they had nothing left. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places, not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to Heartfelt Chronicles, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.